Welcome to today's video where we check out Wargaming's Golden Boy, and that is of course a tank that came in during Wargaming's probably not so great years of World of Tanks Mercenaries, and that's when all of the mercenary overpowered tanks came into the game like the Machine, and of course the Minuteman is the one that we're looking at today, the Tier 7 American heavy tank. It runs Rampage at tier 7 if you can manage to get your hands on it, and if you're coming up against something like this, well, it's essentially a T29 with a load of spaced armour all over it, which makes it, pretty ridiculous in terms of its armour model, because not only do you have the spaced armour of the tracks on the side, you then have a load of spaced plates, and then you have the side armour. So yes, this is amazing for side scraping in this tank. Yes, you can still get penned in the upper hull area if they manage to catch you in that area, but for the most part that's never going to really happen, especially if you're side scraping correctly. Anyway, as far as the tank itself, it does have a few limitations, and that's the gun, which is the kind of key aspect of the tank that probably won't be the best. However, with the equipment that we're using, we're able to increase the DPM of it by decreasing the loading time, so you'll be 10% quicker at reloading with this equipment. We've then got improved ventilation, gun stabilizer, and of course then we've got the commander perks like track mechanic, etc. that will just make the heavy tank experience a little bit better. Obviously we've got two gameplays to have a look at in today's video and check out how Wargaming's Golden Boy really stacks up in 2022. Let's have a look now. So, what's a better way to start today's video off than with an Erlenberg game where we managed to have a great result and showcase exactly the strengths of the tank, which is of course the accuracy, the armour, and just the sheer kind of movement that you can get with the tank as well. Now, you're not particularly the fastest tank in the game, therefore, you know, the movement becomes a little bit limited, but because of the armour model you can keep advancing with this tank, which makes it a little bit easier to play. Now obviously what we've got with this is the ability to kind of get hold down, and that is where the Minuteman becomes almost impenetrable, and if you can manage to get up against some kind of building, or if you're side scraping against opponents, you can pretty much be like a tier 9, because although the armour model of the tank, say if you were just out in the open against other tier 9 tanks, then yeah, you're going to get ripped apart. However, if you do use the right aspects of the tank up against those tier 9s that you can meet with this tank, yes, you can go +2, it's not a preferential, that would make it completely broken. But with this tank, if you do manage to get into those scenarios, you can still pull off good results, and the AP penetration is good, the APCR penetration is really good, and considering it is APCR, it means that you can actually hit targets very nicely with this heavy tank, as opposed to, say, if you had heat, because yeah, you can snapshot and you can attack a lot of those light tanks, which can be a real pain against heavy tanks within World of Tanks. Obviously, at the beginning of the game, it's a pretty easy result. We've picked up 652 damage, nothing really that crucial. And of course, we'll pick up a little bit extra. Erlenberg is a map that probably doesn't favour heavy tanks, at least initially it probably does, but as you get further on it really doesn't, because it then becomes you've got to push across the bridges on either side of the map, which become a real problem because yeah, you're slow, you're cumbersome, and then therefore you're going to get caught out by a lot of the medium and tank destroyers that typically like to camp on Erlenberg, which is probably why Erlenberg is usually known as Campenberg, because you have one side win this side of the map and the enemy team usually win the other side of the map, and therefore you've then just basically got two sides of the map fighting against each other where no one really wants to push, because you're pushing into like 12 different opponents that are going to be sat on a ridgeline. Obviously in this game, considering we're top tier, we've got good armour and we have, not awful view range for a heavy tank. The T29 as a standard tank in the tech tree is not particularly the most kind of blind tank in the game, which means that yeah, you can play a little bit more aggressively. You're not going to be outspotting light tanks, don't get that mixed up. You aren't a light tank in this heavy tank. However, you do have kind of pretty much everything that you need as a heavy tank, especially one that wants to be super aggressive because of the armor model and the ability to have that spaced armor everywhere. It's just basically Wargaming's introduction to, here you go, here's a premium tank that's just blatantly way better than the standard tech tree version, and considering that the T29 is probably one of the best tier 7 heavy tanks within the game, if not the best tier 7 heavy tank in the game, then yeah, a premium version that's even better, doesn't sound too fair and balanced to me, but here we go. Obviously, OI Experimental out in the middle of nowhere, he's going to get picked off pretty easily. On Erlenberg, what you don't want to do is come over that ridge line, which you saw the OI Experimental do, because yeah, you do get picked off really easily, and so you don't want to be doing that. However, in this game, what we're doing is now basically the aim when you come on this flank is to get up close and personal to the hill that's straight in front of us. Now obviously if there are tanks that are going to be sat there firing at you as you kind of advance, it's not going to be worth it, but in this game we saw the opportunity to move forward and press our advantage, and if we can get to the ridgeline we can basically spot the whole enemy team and keep them lit up by proxy spotting. And then what happens is that if the enemies then want to spot us, or at least do anything towards us to negate themselves being spotted, then they've got to then come over the ridgeline, and therefore our team that are going to be sat behind us, where you see the 2 tank destroyers down below by the enemy cap, they're going to be able to take shots at anyone that decides to, you know, come over. And it's definitely not going to be worth it for anyone that does decide to come over, unless they come over in force, and you know there's 3 or 4 tanks that come over and then all dissipate back over the hill, but that would be very, very unlikely. There's never usually that much communication within a team on World of Tanks. Obviously what we've done here is just press the advantage. You know, we have a very, very strong turret, and yes, we are top tier in this gameplay, making it probably somewhat easier for us to be able to do stuff, but we're still feeding on a lot of these tier 6s. E25 comes blazing in trying to help his team, but yeah, that doesn't really happen when you're coming up against a tank like this. Obviously what we do, just put a nice little shot into the J Panther in the side, not going to be a problem. Angle for the Brumbar. J Panther somehow misses, which is unfortunate for him, and it looks like it's curtains for him as well. So yeah, a very, very easy way of showcasing what the Minuteman can do. And of course 3,100 damage in a tier 7 heavy tank is nothing to really sniff at, but you just see how easy this tank really is to play, considering we didn't really have to play too hard. There was nothing really in that game that challenged us, not even one tank that could really deal much damage, and when you come top tier, that is exactly what you can expect with the golden boy that is the Minuteman. Yeah, they definitely made this to sell some of the tanks for people to pick up and make money. Yeah, it's definitely one of those. Slightly different matchup, we are no longer top tier in this gameplay, which is on Fisherman's Bay, probably one of my more favoured maps within World of Tanks console, and that's because I just feel like every single tank class has somewhere to go on this map, as long as you know where you're going. And with a tank that can get hold down and basically be impenetrable unless they hit that cupola on the very top, which is really hard to actually hit, to be honest with you, unless you're aiming down into it, which becomes pretty much trash then. But yeah, when you're above someone and you're aiming down on them, this tank is nigh impenetrable, because you can often hide the lower plate, which makes the angle on the upper plate really hard to hit, and then the turret armor basically impenetrable. And then yes, coming up against tier 9s, what typically happens with the T29, of course the tech tree version of this tank, is they can pen your cheeks, because at some point tanks typically, when they're +2, -2, even the strongest parts of your armour can get penetrated. Unfortunately for everyone else on the enemy team, this T29 has spaced armour all over the turret, and that's big force field that can basically negate any real hits to the turret. Now obviously in this game mode we're going to take it into a position where we can use that turret armour, and although, you know, we may get penned in the upper plate depending on if they hit us, we can still rely on that turret to occasionally bounce a few. And in this matchup, this is probably one of my favoured positions, and I'm sure if you've watched any number of videos that happen to feature Fisherman's Bay, for me this is an area where I love to come at the beginning of the game to get early shots on heavy tanks, like you saw us hit the Tiger 2 earlier, and where we can get just a couple shots of free damage at the beginning of the game. I'm not saying if you're in an OI or one of the big fat Type 5 heavies to come over here where you don't have gun depression and you're going to have to expose every single part of your tank. I'm talking about tanks that have decent gun depression and not an absolutely terrible turret, or alternatively a tank that is fast enough that when you get spotted you can retreat away before you take any hits. There's nothing worse them taking early damage within World of Tanks, so make sure that you aren't doing that. However, with Wargaming's golden boy, as I like to call it, yeah, this one doesn't really matter if you get hit in the turret because you just have that nice turret armor. And with the accuracy that this tank gets, yes, you can snipe people like that, and it makes it so much fun. I don't know how Wargaming thought that this was completely balanced and fair for the enemy team, but apparently it is. Having a tank that is just this good in the game is something that I just don't think was quite right. But then again, Wargaming introduced things like the machine at the same time period, which, yeah, you all know how that worked out. Obviously, you can see us blocking damage here against the Jagdpanther there, or the Ferdinand even, who's hitting us in the side. We're then going to just advance because we can be aggressive in this game. We can do whatever we want, really, when you're playing in this tank. And obviously, we'll try and go for a shot into him. The General, however, does manage to pen us, and that's because they're getting the frontal armour of the tank, where they can hit that upper plate or lower plate, which is essentially just a T29. So if you're coming up against tier 8 and 9s and they just, you know, come full face at you where you can't really avoid any of the shots, then they're going to be able to pen you in that upper plate or lower plate, which is a little bit annoying, but nothing too major, as most tier 7 heavy tanks would get penned straight through the front, even if it is in the turret a lot of the time, if you're playing things like the IS or the T29 stock or tech tree version of the T29, because the turret armour doesn't have this thick upper plate or turret plate that this tank gets. Obviously, you see us trying to get a shot on the Ferdinand. We know where the weak points are, we just can't quite hit them, which is unfortunate, because the weak point being those big flat super plates that are in this. But what we will do, get a nice shot on the Scorpion, and you can see here blocking 980 damage so far, which is nice. Whether or not we'll get any more is dependent on what we do next. Obviously, getting hit by the Ferdinand, not ideal. We lose our loader, which will swiftly put back in our tank, and it's 7 on 7. I'm thinking, this doesn't look particularly the best spot for this game. So what you see us doing, just retreating back, making sure that the Scorpion G, although now knowing he's not actually active in the game, but what we did is put that house in the way of anyone that was over to the right. Now we can deal with this FE4202P, who's then moving aggressively behind us, because if we don't deal with him, it's going to be curtains. And similarly, if we don't deal with this Vanguard and manage to hit him in this shot, we would have been in deep, deep trouble, which luckily for us, we did manage to deal with him. And now you'll see me reversing behind this building just to my right, so that no one can shoot me in the side once I'm spotted. And then when this FE4202 is dealt with, we can then advance in whatever direction will be best for the game at hand at the time of recording. So obviously Ferdinand's to our right, this General's over down there in the city. We've obviously got the FE4202P in the cap circle, and now we can just advance to help out our team in whatever direction is probably best. What we'll do here is just advance. Obviously we know there's probably something over to the right which we saw around coming out, which is indeed correct, and we've now got the Ferdinand, and as we bounce a shot from the behind, which is something you can probably expect with the Minuteman, because it does get a spaced armour plate on the back of its turret, because of course, why not? We are wargaming after all. Now, what else can we do in this game? What we need to do is now search for the cap circle, because the worst thing in the world is when you get capped out. Obviously, I'm sure many of you know exactly what I'm on about. But 2,400 damage, 1,200 assistance, 1,200 block damage even, not bad result. And yeah, although we make a bit of a fluff shot there, trying to hit the FE4202 behind a car, doesn't quite work out, we can still push kind of aggressively towards him, try and help out the artillery, who may or may not die, but don't worry, artillery's completely fine and balanced and helps himself out to the rest of the hit points on the FE4202P, which I'm sure was probably a little bit salty at the fact he just died to artillery. Obviously we're now capping, which means that the enemy team now have to push towards the cap to reset it, and so if we can just provide some sort of covering fire from this position up here, we're going to be quids in, and we're going to be able to at least hopefully get some damage. Obviously what we're doing is just going up to this bush, make sure that we are kind of sat within it to be able to detect anyone potentially, or just stay undetected whilst we're sat here. We put a round into the Ferdinand. We're now just going to retreat slightly back because we don't know where that medium tank is. We're then going to aim for the drive wheel of the Ferdinand, which we managed to hit, and therefore take him out as we just cap, and that medium tank goes unaware somewhere within the game. So we still win it, 3,100 damage once again with the Minuteman, and you can see just the armor model of the tank, the ability for this tank to just make it so easy to get damage and to get block damage and just basically carry the game. This is the ultimate tier 7 heavy tank in terms of everything that you'll need in a heavy tank. And when the maximum tier you can come up against is tier 9 and you have armor that you can actually bounce tier 9 rounds with in a tier 7, that's very, very unusual, and this is the tank that you'll want to be picking up. It's fairly cheap as well if you want to pick it up in the Wargaming store. You can do, it's in the tech tree. Don't know whether or not it's actually worth it for you, but make up your own mind on whether you want to pay Wargaming extra money. Of course, this is something I picked up on the 40% discount to do a review and this video on, and hopefully it showcased just why this tank, when it first got released, was so broken when you didn't have tanks within the game, like the Hellcat 105. Don't forget to check out the most recent novel tank builds on screen right now and check out how they play within World of Tanks console. Thanks for watching, I'll see you there.